I think we need to take more pride in our homegrown solutions. I think we've had, in the early days, there was a lot of copy pasting from the US, and the US was seen as the role model for how things should be done.
The argument is out there in some experts is the ESO model is dead.
Yeah.
How dead is it? It's debatable.
Is there the market for specialization? Is there the funding for specialization? Or we at risk of mirroring a little bit the farmers who then end up having that one good crop that looks amazing because now there's an offtake and it looks great. It works for 2 or 3 seasons. And then something shifts, and now I have a crop that I can sell.
Community.
Yes.
Now it's I think if I were to rank buzzwords, I think AI is top, definitely. I think second, or a close second, would be the word community.
Yeah.
Hi there, welcome to the Startup Evangelist. I'm Daniel Kitwa, your host. Today we're on the road at Growth Africa, and I'm joined with Ian, Executive Director and Partner at Growth Africa. Ian, karibu.
No, thanks a lot. So my name is Ian, and I'm an Executive Director and Partner at Growth Africa, which is a Pan-African entrepreneur support organization and ecosystem builder. Very happy to have you here and to have some of these conversations around what it is that is the pain points and the opportunities, the hopes and the fears, and what it is that we could do and do, especially working together.
Yeah. Ian, welcome to a conversation. And I'm happy to have this. I think we've been, exploring it for a while. Maybe tell us a bit about yourself. I know you have a rich background in Africa, supporting startups, SMEs, and businesses. But just tell us a bit about yourself, what you've been up to over the last, decade.
Yeah. That old enough as usual, decades there. But I think as all the fact that you put it on the road, I think speaks to the fact that it's a journey.
Yeah.
So my name is Ian. I'm Executive Director of Partner at Growth Africa. We work with the support entrepreneurs and innovators. And it's been about 17, 18 years in Africa. I'd almost say it's long enough that I've stopped counting. As the point where you kind of know it's been long enough that it doesn't matter whether it's 16 or 15 or 18. So it came initially to Uganda in 2000 as part of an entrepreneurial journey. Joined a startup then in Uganda that we were part of growing into Kenya. And then that business, the investor that was behind collapsed in the .com bubble, which only those of us who have a certain age would know what was the .com bubble. I left and then I came back, I think 2005, 2006, and joined the two partners who founded Growth Africa. Been with the Growth Africa for about, in the 15 years. I had about 2.5 years where I stepped down to work with a large corporate. I needed to see what it was if trying to bring an entrepreneurial mind into a big business, thinking naively that magic would happen because they had all the resources, they had money, so differently from sitting on the entrepreneur support side, that these guys would actually be able to fund these ideas that you could take to market and develop. And the realization, of course, was that that's not how big business works. So as much as there might be resources, there wasn't the space for creativity or the appreciation in a nation, I'd say, which is, well, at least always fits me better. So I'd much rather have no money, a little money, and then use creativity as a tool that we can then leverage and build up. So that's also why we're part of the journey with Adapt and with entrepreneurs, probably today fit to my personality. And you can say that Growth Africa kind of evolved over 3 iterations where we started out doing moderate business consulting, B2B matchmaking, then did some small business lending for some years, and then since 2012, really been focusing and dedicated to supporting and helping African entrepreneurs, which is always very exciting. I think for those of us who love working with innovation, creativity, and building business that can create impact, and this is always an exciting space. Africa is not sure of opportunities. It's wealthy, and I think it was entrepreneurial in Malawi used to say he didn't understand why people talk about Africa being poor. He thought it was very rich, rich in opportunities. But it speaks to how we build a narrative around what it is that we see and what we want to focus on. Is it the lack of things, or is the things that we see that is plentiful, but which we then typically are short of converting into actualized opportunities? No.
Very interesting. You mentioned your journey in terms of starting in Africa and almost going to a big business and trying to sort of be the catalyst from the inside, and then coming back to the small and nimble, if I were to use that word. Maybe since you've also brought up the issue of culture, corporate culture, and also you've mentioned some markets. I know you've worked with entrepreneurs across different geographies in Africa. I think I've seen your programs in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and other places.
Yep.
What would you say are the different mindsets, entrepreneurial mindsets, across these markets? And also, are there also aspects that are similar?
Yeah.
As you work with these great entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's correct. So we work in and have offices across different places in Africa. And that was, I think at an early point, we had to kind of make a decision whether to grow domestically and then focus and be purely Kenyan, but grow and build that out, or to be with a dream of becoming Pan-African. And then ultimately trying to help entrepreneurs, also help them scale their business beyond one market, but trying to help them as well, which we know is one of the challenges. And then almost flip it, maybe building it a bit on the piece before, because whenever we have been coming into a new country, there is a tendency of telling us how much different we are. So I go to Uganda, but we're different and we're not like Kenya. Yeah, fair enough. But the experience always is probably 80 and 90% that is the same. But we tend to also here to focus on the differences as opposed to the similarities. And it's not to say there isn't differences. I'd say, for example, Ethiopia definitely is significantly different. There is vast differences there in terms of background and likes. And we can also see that Kenya is more entrepreneurial. Probably also a lot of it comes from a society and a system that tends to have been more liberal.
Yeah.
Whereas when we look then at Ethiopia, for example, or Tanzania for that sake, then you come from a more socialist leaning background, which hasn't been traditionally very entrepreneur friendly.
Yeah.
So it's a markets that are evolving in terms of that mindset of what entrepreneurship is and appreciation as well. I think the way that we relate to, we talked about hierarchy, the way we talk about respecting your elders. And what does that mean and how does that look like? I think we see differences there where I think also here we're seeing Kenya advancing, and it's not to say that there's not respect for people more of age like myself, but I think we have a more moderate approach, and I think we'll need to find out the respect needs to come because people earn it because they have something to bring. It's not by position or by name or the likes. I think we see that we have a lot more. So maybe not a lot more. I think the agenda around female entrepreneurs is something that's more advanced here, and we'll probably talk more about it. We are making bigger strides here. I'd probably say that sometimes, and donors love talking about inclusivity.
Yeah.
And I think probably some of the biggest differences, not necessarily comparing Nairobi with Kampala as much as it is going Nairobi, going to Eldoret, going deeper in countries is probably where the bigger differences are in terms of mindset, exposure, what it is that we want. I think there is almost a capital city subculture that often is created, which probably mirrors each other more, and where the similarities are probably much bigger.
Yeah.
I think we have always had a more tech-centered approach, and we are lucky that we also, in terms of the number of internationals that we have in Nairobi, means that Nairobi always felt relatively more exposed and more international, perhaps some of the other countries that we operate in. But I think there's a catch-up game, and sometimes also that we think about the fact that we are ahead, but the idea that it's not a catch-up game is a fallacy. So we need to stay ahead if that's what we want to be, and build on what we have that is great and is best.
Yeah. I like the way you flipped the focus from just differences, but also looking at the differences within. And I totally agree that so there's not much happening in terms of focus of supporting entrepreneurial activities in tier 2 cities, which is quite needed if you are to sort of bring a more holistic, inclusive element. The other thing I wanted to sort of build on is, do you feel like we really get how to approach growth and what that means from a Kenya, an Ethiopia, a Uganda, whatever perspective? Do you feel we still, because it feels like in Kenya or Nairobi, let me just use the Nairobi subculture, we have an almost almost like trying to make it another type of Silicon Valley VC model. And we've tried to like push that out into other places. It's not sticking, right? And even here it's already struggling, right? So what do you think we are missing in terms of nuance, either as advisors, investors, and other enablers?
I think we need to take more pride in our homegrown solutions. I think we've had, in the early days, there was a lot of copy pasting from the US, and the US was seen as the role model for how things should be done. A lot of people aspired to be like the US, probably also because they had the biggest brands in entrepreneur support and investing, etc. So there was always the US that took a lead on that. A lot of the models and what we were trying to help entrepreneurs in were models that was borrowed, stolen, copied, and often purely localized and contextualized to what we were doing here. And I think there is an element there. We need to ideally build something that is our own, where the tools, the methodology, the approach we have speaks to the needs what we have in the ground here, which is very different. And I think you're absolutely right that we've kind of stuck with the word silicon. And I think sometimes I feel tempted to spell it silly instead of something else and say, is there perhaps something there that we need to take a reckoning conversation with? I think the silicon always becomes very tech focused, and perhaps that's not doing us a favor in terms of the opportunity we have here, where tech is only one part of it. We actually had a brand on one of the projects we did where we coined the brand, which is Startup Savannah, which is really what I think speaks more to what we should be doing instead of copying silicon and aspire to be. And I get that for some, especially investors, it does resonate. And that's for that point of view, it's a good communication. But in terms of being honest about what it is we are, I think it'd be greater if we could combine the words that speaks to each of the countries and their strengths, and then combining that in a different way that doesn't necessarily mirror something that's picked up from outside. And I'm sure that every country could pick something that would speak to their location, and which would then be, if we brand it right, and I think it's more of a communications task, then I think we could get that right. And in principle, every location could be coined by something that would speak to what it is. And yes, it's also perhaps fair enough to say that tech has taken a lot of the headlines. Tech is where the big ticket comes in. It's what is spoken about, where a lot of the investments and spaces are happening in agribusiness doesn't necessarily reach the headlines. It doesn't need to. The business isn't necessarily a B2C. It can be vastly different, and it tends to be also perhaps it's a bit more, I wouldn't say conservative, but it's founders that are living and working very differently. They also typically then doesn't necessarily sit in the cool spaces in Nairobi. So definitely a very different DNA there.
You've triggered my mind on two conversations. One with Kyle on this investing in boring businesses, And usually you don't find them in, $1,000, $2,000 conferences, right?
Yeah.
You have to sort of, have a process to getting where they are.
Yeah.
And just, coming at their level and understanding this is how they build and this is how they work, and sort of enabling that now at scale, right?
Right.
Yeah. Maybe a question on now the ESO kind of.
Yeah. I had to move my chair to make sure that I also signal that this is now we're getting to.
Yeah. So the argument is out there in some experts is the ESO model is dead.
Yeah.
Uh, how dead is it?
Yeah.
It's debatable. Of course, historically they've done a lot of ESOs have done good work in terms of incubating, very companies and organizations from day zero.
Yeah.
Giving them space, giving them mentors, access to investors, validating their business models. But even then themselves, in terms of their internal business engines, they're kind of struggling.
Yep.
So I want us to reflect on that and say, okay, what are the things maybe we could have done better or we should do better going forward, particularly around, commercial sustainability, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I think there's a little bit of a sense of have a lot of it been pushed to doing more of the same.
Yeah.
And where we're not necessarily building. And this also speaks to the funding increasingly, I feel, is the place where it's about operationalizing, delivering programs and projects. Even a lot of things that are name tag programs are actually projects because they're one-off. They're not building and they're not growing anything. So I think we've seen I'll not say a pathway. I think distraction in the ecosystem where the money also is perhaps directed towards things that are kind of building into this, where we're not seeing the right or enough efforts of how do we build forward? What is the strategy? How do we grow? And thinking of ourselves that all of us are entrepreneurs ourselves.
Yeah.
Ideally, we should have a growth strategy. What is that we want to build going forward? Where is that we see new market opportunities? Where is that we see we need to specialize and build that forward? And specialization might be another topic that we have as being spoken about, but perhaps internally we're not speaking enough about it. And I think there's a sense of, is there the market for specialization? Is there the funding for specialization? Or are we at risk of mirroring a little bit the farmers who then end up having that one good crop that looks amazing because now there's an offtake and it looks great. It works for 2 or 3 seasons. And then something shifts.
Yeah.
And now I have a crop that I can't sell. And now I lose completely faith in what it was I was doing. So that we also make sure that this sense of sustainability is built, and it's not just because now this topic is hot, and it's hot for 2 or 3 years, and then it becomes mainstream, or is no longer hot, and then the funding and the support will fade, and perhaps also entrepreneurs will have drifted into other topics.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that it is the ESO model, but if we're then looking at the favorite word of a lot of, especially funders, around sustainability, how do we develop that? I don't think there's any doubt that we have not invested enough and looked enough, been innovative enough around how do we create revenue streams. So I think let's start with that, because there's also, for some people, sustainability means that I, as an ESO, can finance my own activities 100%. I don't think it's not viable.
Yeah.
And it's actually also not what's happening out there. I think you have a fallacy. If we go to Europe, ESOs are funded by the local municipality or the region, or essentially funded. They don't have either. They may have a sprinkle of corporate funding that we tend to struggle with here. Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that we could do. There's definitely having an alignment with the entrepreneurs that we work with. So what would be a fair contribution by the entrepreneurs for successful growth delivered? Does that mean that we should take shares, which I think something we have experimented with in the past? I think time wasn't right when we tried it as Growth Africa. I think timing would be different today. And I think entrepreneurs might also be at a place where they better understand that if value is created, value needs to be ideally honored as well.
Yeah.
Are there simple things such as fees being paid for being part of a program?
Yeah.
Which is something is the simplest thing. And here we often get the pushback, but entrepreneurs can't afford.
Yeah.
My comment is always, I haven't talked about how much it is. So you're telling me they can't afford 1 shilling? Of course they can. And you're laughing exactly because that's the argument we get into. And there is something to be said about paying for something. Now I'm a customer. I have demands. I can complain. I also appreciate I have a commitment that's different when things are given to me for free, which is ironically enough, if we look at what entrepreneurs do, the support they get from entrepreneurs, from ESOs is probably the only free offering of service they get.
Yeah.
So there's in principle no logic for why we're doing it for free and don't have something.
They pay office rent. They pay
Yes,
for raw materials.
exactly.
Yeah.
They pay their staff. And they also, you can say, but maybe they can't pay a lot.
Yeah.
That's then the argument. Let's then find a way. The irony is a lot of the funded programs by donors in principle doesn't allow us to charge because the donor would say, well, we're paying for it. Instead of us saying perhaps, well, we could find a mechanism where we can still charge. And then whatever we charge, we then use that to provide an extra service or to do something else that has value. So it's not that we're going to pocket the money and to say, okay, here we go. That's not the idea. It would be great if we could bring in and break down a little bit of the silos with investors and say, to the extent where we can create deal flow, what is that worth? Is there a commission system or the likes that could create a pathway as well for us to be more collaborative with investors and building what for them would be a pipeline? And what's that worth? We've only seen, I think, 2 or 3 times over the years that we worked where there's been an investor that has such an approach. The traditional approach is that that's not the case. Then I say we have corporates, and I think there's more we could do. I think they will not bring in the bulk of the money, but there probably could be ways in which we could activate some resources that could help us reach some level of sustainability. And then I'd say I had the question yesterday from a potential partner, and they were asking, so do you host any major ecosystem anchor events? And when I look across the ecosystem, a lot of the events are not even owned, so to say, by local entities. They are by foreign entities. And perhaps if we had a more collaborative effort, could there be an anchor event? And events can drive money, but they can also be a significant loss making. So it's not one that I would, and as a discipline is very different from perhaps what we do day to day. I think there's a lot around, can we monetize data? I think it's still up for debate. I don't think we've seen a model yet, but I could imagine that could be an area where we could do as well. Insights and data at a broader perspective as an ecosystem is something that I think we could and should. One of my favorite topics is how there is a very extractive approach to how we are being interviewed or surveyed by others. Typically, these are entities who are on consulting assignments. They've been paid to get this. We volunteer because we're very nice people, and it's perhaps a bit of a ecosystem tax. Then we contribute. But why, in essence, is somebody being paid to do something where I then spend my time and I give my advice for free? And often I don't see any return. I often see that these efforts do not turn into something. What if we, at an ecosystem or collective level, said, well, we could build some of these data in, and then we build our own knowledge base that we can start selling. And we could potentially do that on a very different level where we do it on a subscription basis and develop different revenue streams, different revenue models, as opposed to always letting others make money off our insights.
It's usually I think you're kind of right on the money in terms of a lot of like the work ESOs are doing. Someone else is getting paid for it, right? You have the consultants, you have the M&E people, you have all the whole other layer of ecosystem.
Yeah, that's maybe, I think that's very interesting you're touching on consultants. Because one perhaps a little bit area we're not discussing is a lot of ESOs are drawing in on a lot of external expertise to deliver their programs and projects. And this is typically done by individual consultants. And what it would happen if we, instead of, in principle, using external resources, said, well, could there be among our peers that same consultant so that we keep the money and the revenue within our ecosystem rather than we actually pay others to do. And the thing also that happens very often is that that consultant is delivering a certain task and gets the deliverables done. But it's typically not part of the ecosystem, typically not part of building or growing. Whereas if you, for example, were an expert in agribusiness and I'm running an agribusiness program, why is that not default going to you and using your expertise, but I'd rather default go out and find some external consultants. And a lot of this is built in a model that we perceive that, well, then you're my competitor, so then you build up an insight in my organization, and then tomorrow you're literally going to compete on what we just did together.
Yeah.
But we haven't really seen it happen. And are we perhaps at a point where we maturity-wise could find ways of creating safeguards or rules and regulations to make sure that this is not the outcome?
Yeah.
And so I think there's almost a matter of what I could call retained revenue, which we are right now paying out as a system, which we potentially could keep within the system, and also would allow us to build perhaps some of that specialization, because the specialization doesn't happen now because you don't have enough work in agribusiness to build up a specialization.
Yeah.
If we did this, perhaps it would be that you specialize in agribusiness, I specialize in circularity, and so we're building up different practice that leads the way to that.
Yeah. It's a good. Yeah, you don't have enough body of work to build a use case or a value prop around specialization. Maybe a question on the sustainability. Do you feel like mergers, acquisitions within ESO and the SMEs are merging, the startups are merging, they're getting acquired. Why not the ESOs? Do we have a situation where we are in some countries or cities, more than we should be? Or maybe take a stab at that.
I think the time is over where we need more. For long, there was an understanding that we needed more ESOs because the need was more than that. I think most places have reached a point now we need better, and perhaps we didn't need less.
Yeah.
And perhaps if there was the right market mechanisms, then ideally the best should be the winning ones, and then we get rid of, or we'll see some of the less good ones then either merge or be acquired. I think the acquisition probably is a bit challenging in our industry because there's no money to acquire for. So probably gratitude acquisitions, if you have such a thing. That's probably what we do. And I think some of the few that has been announced as acquisition, I think if we were to go behind the scene, it would probably be more symbolic than anything else. I think part of what needs to be done is some sobering conversation where what is the value of the assets that an ESO can bring? And it typically would be, there's a team and a manpower that could be interesting, that assumes that I have enough work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's almost the opposite. That could be a reputation, a brand. That could be a pipeline of funders and clients and partners.
Like a database.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And relations that means there will be continuous work and opportunities as well. Of course, the reputation also among entrepreneurs and funders that we're doing good work.
Yeah.
And then I think we have brands. And I know the brand is like the holy grail. People that it's so important. It's part of who I am. It's my brand for what I started. So the thought that I would surrender or give up my brand is almost part of my identity that would be gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we've seen, I think both on the business merging side and also on the ESO side, that actually is a stumbling block.
Yeah.
And we know that, well, there's at least part of my network who says that there are a number of ESOs across Africa which the founders would like to exit. It's a sense perhaps that they've been at this for quite some time. They now perhaps say that I need to focus a bit more on how I take care of my family. And that might mean I need to do something else that has a different level of salary and different level of pay than this lifestyle.
Yeah.
There may also be a couple of them that the pipeline isn't looking so good. And then the external environment we're operating in right now, there might also be a sense that the money is going to get less. So it's not exactly going to be a growing industry per se. But I don't think we have an approach to how could somebody secretly flag out and say, hey, I'm up for talks. I'm not about to die. We're still rocking solid, but there are some fundamentals that mean I could be interested in being part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And then perhaps we also need to look at it as not necessarily an outright acquisition in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Could we form constellation that might be more network organizations or cooperatives or the likes? Will we perhaps also need to have a little bit of a relook at what could such a thing look like?
Yeah.
Where there might be, you retain your brand, but you're part of a brand. So a little bit, you said what we had traditionally with law firms and others, that you in principle of a network. You adhere to certain standards and you have access to certain resources and the likes of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've seen enough of that. And I think part of it is also there are probably very few of us that are big enough to have headspace and to look at this at the systemic level that we need to. It's something definitely, if there were funders that were willing and interested in looking at that, I think there could definitely be entities that would be very interested in looking at this. But I think it has to be more of a collaborative effort. I don't think there'll be many entities that will outright be able to go out and for sure really acquire and build it up from that point of view.
Yeah. Or even I'm assuming you could, you could put sweat equity into someone else's brand, and that's maybe the process, or you could franchise or whatever. And I'm also imagining we are seeing now a lot of corporates setting up foundations. A lot of banks, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it wasn't the norm. It was a one-off. So I think there's a strategic shifts within some of these players, and I think maybe they could be at some point when they are ready and they also have that proverbial headspace. They can actually be, the entities to externalize, some of those resources into ESO that have already built this body of work over the years.
Yeah. No, and I think banks is another part of that financial resource fabric that we haven't woven nicely together, and where there's a bit of a siloed world there as well. And all entrepreneurs will need a bank, so that the banks will be a part of the fabric, and they will not be the ones providing the growth capital scale. And that's also not how it's happening out there. But they have a role to play, and they could be more part of what we're doing. But I think we will see, and we'll probably see that in some kind of circle, that they will have a look at trying to attempt to do their own programs and then realize this is not what we're great at and it's too costly. And I wish there was a way we could work more closer so that experimentation doesn't happen, because whenever you've then spent and you didn't get the result, then you will step back for 2-3 years, and we can't really afford, or we shouldn't afford as an ecosystem we have those kind of cycles of engagement and then disengagement, but rather make sure that all of us have success in that space.
Yeah.
And yes, if there were ways to have more collaborative efforts between banks, investors, ESOs, and seeing how could there be more connectors with that, that would be logic. I think we've seen also investors trying to build their own programs. With most ESOs would have a dream or an aspiration to set up their own fund to address the shortcomings. So we all see the shortcomings. They're saying, why do we address some of them together?
I totally agree. There's like, I guess the other point would be how do even ASOs articulate their value to to the banks and the foundations that are local foundations that are being set up. Do we, because waiting for them to organize a pitch event is not going to happen. So would a Growth Africa maybe a challenge, organize come and see kind of event or forum, and these banks or these corporates are invited to sort of hear out the opportunities that lie in terms of collaboration, either partial exits or in sort of program or project base, and who knows what will come out of that.
And I think that's a very good point. I think it speaks to perhaps also, do we have, and I don't think we have the kind of forums that are more tailored to that kind of convening, where it's not a conference, it's not a workshop, it's something else that perhaps is a format that we don't have right now. Which is building certain relations, building certain conversations, and sustaining them over time. Doing it perhaps a little bit less formal, perhaps smaller rooms and smaller groups where there's more intentional conversations that we need, and which also knows, and we need to accept that this thing is a conversation that will take time, because we're coming from different points, and there's a reason why the site is there right now. So we need to work a little bit rather than thinking that we're going to have an MOU tomorrow. Because that MOU will literally just be the paper. It's written on. And also have a better understanding what it is that for each of us is value, or the values that we can create, and how does that fit into what it is. All banks would want to have more customers. Entrepreneurs are potential customers. They're not. The banks would be interested in having investors on board, because the growth capital the banks can provide will have to come from the investors still. Investors are interested, obviously, in entrepreneurs being banked. So in principle, all the things logically, rationally is there. We just need to patch them together. So that they also, and patching is part not the word, it is to weave them together so that they have a logic, interconnection, and they make sense the way they should.
Very, very interesting reflections. I think the other thing I wanted to ask, and adding to, I think, as we sort of wind up, is community. Now it's I think if I were to rank buzzwords, I think AI is top, definitely. I think second, or a close second, would be the word community. We know a lot of ESOs definitely have a lot of reach in terms of client databases, SMEs, investor contacts, even associations. You could add them into that sort of band. We are seeing models out there in other markets where people are actually monetizing off a community sort of pitch or model. So how do we go about it, if at all there is a use case there? I've had, of the last few days, I've had my head sort of
Well, let me know if you found the golden solution, because I'm
curious to hear your thoughts.
And I think community is rightfully so one of the things that we should be talking more about. I think it typically, because it speaks a lot to a collective resource, it speaks also to what happens when entrepreneurs, in principle, exit a program or project where typically there's a risk that we just leave them alone. So unless there's funding to do more or do something else, then now you're on your own. Unless, again, we knew that there was somewhere we could kind of say, well, now you graduated from my activities, and the next step would be for you to move on to so and so. But also that we, especially through our work, we know there's a lot of value in peer-to-peer learning. So the idea that there's tradition, I think, and AI is probably disrupting this as well. Tradition, the idea was there need to be an older person without any hair, like looking like this, perhaps, whereas the person with all the wisdom, and we just need to sit and listen to that. When in fact, a lot of the insights that are more valuable, at least as valuable, comes from my peer entrepreneurs who've done something they've learned from that is very practical, tangible, and which is what one could and should learn from. And learning also sometimes, or often, not necessarily has to be the same industry, but thematic and topic things that we can learn from. So I think what we've, as ESOs, probably challenged was that the community bit, there's no one funding it. It's not to say that we need to be paid for everything, but we also know that there has to be a certain level of sustainability. And I think in our struggle to do all the rest, this is I wouldn't say the cherry in the pie, but it is the cherry on the cake, but it's the thing that we have not had enough time to invest in doing. And I think we can look at community as sub-communities. So I could have, as Growth African, I could have my own community of entrepreneurs that have gone through our programs.
Yeah.
I could, in principle, even have a network of entrepreneurs that not all went through our programs, but they were shortlisted. And then the bigger one be anyone's ever applied could be a community as well. And then the other is the communities where it could be that I team up with a number of other ESOs and say, why don't we pool this resources together and do something together, which is also maybe a more cost-effective way of doing it. And then have that discussion around, so what is that need to happen actually? Because maybe it isn't going to be as costly. And here cost is not, it's probably not actually direct cost, it's more time. That's probably the biggest expense we would have.
And it's time, because there's also opportunity cost, right?
Yes,
it's the time you're putting into building the community. You're sort of, there's something on the tail end suffering, right? It could be other programs you're supposed to work on, fundraising, etc.
And I think one of the, if we could get community, and we say the community can get to a certain scale, is that what we should start focusing our conversation with corporate says is really what you should help us fund, is that the community. And to be also because as much as you're right for say we have banks that are setting up foundations, I think we're still on a learning curve on what is a foundation and what's a non-profit extension of my full commercial work, which I think some of the outfits right now haven't progressed yet. So could that be ways where some of the corporates say, well, here we actually talk about this in volume. We can draw down on our marketing budgets and our CSR budgets, which traditionally was where, and we get some exposure, which is typically where we don't want to sit in the longer run. I think we can be okay with doing this if it's as a pathway to get some corporates into the room and get them engaged and involved. If it is long-term, it's just about local placement and talk about my products and then we haven't really shifted gear. But if it is a way to get that conversation to happen, I think it is possible. And I'm also quite sure that there are opportunities with larger organizations that if we can arrange for things such as online lessons and sessions that has a certain volume, there is an interest in helping. And the narrative of being involved with and supporting African entrepreneurs from that perspective definitely is there. So I think there are aspects we could look at. And I don't know how aggressive we can be. I mean, could an aggressive model be to say that I will get X number of people in the room, in an online room, and for every 100 more I can bring, I literally am able, then you pay a different price. So we also recognize a lot of what you want is the exposure and the engagement with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And in that aspect, I could set up the room and I could collaborate with other ESOs to say, well, we really want to fill the room as much as we can.
Yeah.
Because the more we can fill it, the more we would have an opportunity to raise some of the resources we need to build this out.
Yeah. I think definitely like a place like Nairobi would be ideal to experiment.
Yes.
I look at other cities or the secondary cities, and you're like, it's happening, but maybe informally. They're also few, so it's much cozier.
Yes, that was a good word. Yes, yeah. Cozy is a good word.
Yeah. So like if you're looking at, we have, a cooperative model that has worked for farmers, and circles, right? You'd find, usually like if you get into a smaller circle, your loan gets approved much faster.
Yes.
So it's less bureaucratic, and the bigger it gets, it becomes more like a bank, and wants to have that kind of aspiration. So I think there's definitely like room for the big hub community type models, and also like very niche, nimble networks. I think we've had opportunities to see country clubs and alumni networks of funders. So I think there's something to scratch. But I think the first question is who is going to pay for that time? And
Yeah. And I think we just need to have enough headspace to kind of say this is now the priority, and is there a group of us who want to work together to try and bring some solutions to it? Then I think that's definitely one part. And I'd say probably also that time is likely working towards a model where if you'd asked 5 years ago, when we talk about community, it would largely be location based.
Yeah.
And now I think a lot of entrepreneurs would identify and could see themselves be part of a virtual community or community of entrepreneurs elsewhere.
Yeah.
I would also say, and I think, because we had a conversation with a couple of universities, and universities should really be at the forefront of this because their alumni is,
Yeah.
if you look at the US in particular, not so much Europe, how the alumni is the machine.
Yeah.
It's the fundraising engine.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that would prevent it to be here as well. The thing is, on the entrepreneurship side, yet, I think the idea that we will have entrepreneurs will become very successful and would almost pay back into a community. We're not there yet. So I don't think that's a model yet. It might be at a later point.
Yeah.
So I think in principle, we could develop something that even others should and could learn from.
Yeah.
Just imagine what some of our leading universities would have if they activated and they cultivated their alumni. But it's also their alumni organizations are very minute, whereas if you go to a big university in the US, they will literally have a very large team that doesn't do anything else in their service alumni. And so there's also, without this always being excused that because we don't have the resources, we can't do it.
Yeah.
We need to, we have to.
Yeah, I remember watching a pod that said, I think Stanford seeded Google and Stanford University and ended up getting like 1% of the business.
Yes.
And probably I would argue that would be the best investment ever, right? So I think definitely universities have a role to play in terms of engaging alumni, over and beyond just the usual career, opportunities kind of pitch, more in terms of giving back, mentorship, and also just reconnecting peers who are sort of at some point scattered across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe last words, what are you excited about going forward? I know the last few questions have been around challenges, and which is still fine. But I think looking ahead, what are you seeing around the horizon? From your perspective, from Growth Africa perspective, from an African or Nairobi or Kenya, whatever, feel free to go wherever you want.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a gloom just because there's less money. I think there's an opportunity with that to say, so with less financial resources, how are we going to make what we have stretch? How can we perhaps address some of the uncoordinated things, the duplication, some of the many activities that are not to standard? And maybe with standard is another word. Will we, out of the moment we're in now, be forced into some conversation that we've avoided for quite some time, and which is perhaps a sense of getting some cleaning house and getting some more structured things so that and it kind of builds into your question around merger and acquisitions as well. What does that ecosystem look like that we need to move forward to? So if you want specialization, what is the things that is required for that to happen? If we want to build AI tools rather than which we are at risk at, we will have nothing to show ourselves. And then we're going to be forced into buying tools from outside of Africa because we haven't built. What does that look like? Can we develop things that we can build from our own? Which means as well that it will be built on our own data, African data, to African context, as opposed to get AI that's built in Silicon Valley based on US data. And that's not unlikely that we will be risk for that, for example. Is there ways that you've definitely heard this, that the message probably often think that ESOs are not developing or delivering investable businesses. My pushback would be, but you don't engage with us either. So we clearly are sitting on two sides and not collaborating towards that sense of making sure the business that we work with ultimately become investable. So if this is the notion, is there as well things where we say, where are these silos that we can and need to break down to ultimately be able to make sure that we unlock more financing to the businesses? Because that's also where the funders are looking at. They will look at what is success, and success can often be perceived to be investments. They say that there's a little bit of a fallacy, perhaps, that we also have entrepreneurs who think that the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who got the most money. And perhaps that's a little bit of conversation for another day. That's really the right token for success. So I think I am actually excited about that we perhaps will be put into a space where we will have to rethink a lot of things in our ecosystem in terms of, is this the model going forward? What are the things that need to change? Then with that, a idealistic hope that it also could bring us together and have more of the conversation that we need to have, and then bring in the funders and others into the room to say, there's clearly something that's not working the way it is right now. We are interested in working with you, but we need to have a bigger say in some of the things that are being done so that we will help shape what this strategy forward could be, assuming that you're willing to put some of the money into actioning this strategy. But it means that we are now delivering a joint effort, a strategic effort, rather than very disjointed and short-term checkbox exercise, which is often what we're seeing at the moment. And so there needs to be willingness and interest. I think it's there. But also sometimes we know that we need to have a pain point to want to be able to do something about it. And if it's not painful enough, it won't happen. And I hope there's a bit of a sense now, if not pain, then some urgency around some matters.
I think through human innovation always progresses on the back of some.
Very true.
I think I like the, looking at the playbook of what needs to be done, right? And, for us to have an M&A, what are the, what's the hit list to think about? I think not everyone is sort of even equipped to to analyze these assets, right? What's behind the curtain, right? So, if there's a tool out there to help, that can be one. I also think like even with the community aspect, like what are the, so it's sort of like maybe a a preparation phase we need to sort of get to be ready when the actual hits comes, and we can be ready to engage. And also like the ESO or the future kind of, are there models to embed AI into our work? Yeah, very, very interesting. I don't know if you have a question for me or, but I think,
No, I'm generally also curious about how you see your reach and your platform potential for some of these conversations.
yeah.
And potentials of some of the conversations to put some of the other actors in the conversation. So how do we bring in some of the investors to try and talk about what are some of the actual or perceived obstacles? Definitely bring in the banks as well, bring in the funders as well, entrepreneurs definitely as well. So that some of the conversations, because for me, they need to start everywhere. It's not that it's one thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that builds into a momentum where suddenly this could happen.
Yeah.
One idea that I've toyed with for quite some time, but probably an example where that I don't get time enough to do it, would be, what if we developed as a concept an entrepreneurship day? And what the whole notion is that all ESOs will bring together their comms teams in one location, or in one location, Nairobi, and then a couple of locations in the secondary cities. And the idea this day is that we want to have entrepreneurship trend on all media. And the day, I think, could easily be that there's activities going on, and there could be trainings and things going on the day that you have teams join and not join, but also it's time to meet and just spend time together. And you could build so much from a media perspective into this. You could say, well, we have an interview corner where we literally had tried to reach out to exactly some of the people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
To do quick 10, 15 punchy interviews that have to be almost converted and brought out the same day. You could even have a live stream where you literally live stream that for the day. And for me, it serves two parts. So one is that it would, if done well, build a social network and a community.
Yeah.
Amongst the ESOs, or at least the ESOs and their comms teams. And then it definitely will advance an agenda that we need. It would, if we do this as Kenya first, and it would put us in the map because this hasn't been done anywhere else. And in principle, if we then coordinated it, it could be so that across Africa, every country picks a day and said, this is the day that we aim for. So we're not sitting on top of each other. And perhaps we could even have a little bit of friendly competition. And I'm not going to go Nigeria on this, but that this is a concept that's too big for anyone to do, but we should have this every single class. And it is almost such a good idea that why we're not doing it. Why haven't we done it? And so maybe as a pitch to you and perhaps Barasa Lab and others, that this could be some of those things that we could do, and where it's just as much getting people in the room, get the conversation going, building a relationship. The rest, I'm not so worried that we wouldn't get it. And I almost suspect that on this one, we could maybe even get a larger comms or branding agency to say, this is so interesting, we would like to dedicate a little bit of strategy time so that you get it strategically where it needs to sit to get that traction that you're looking for. But if you had 150 years old, or just even 50 in Kenya, that decided for that one day, we're going to drive this hashtag, we're going to drive this agenda, already there, I think there's an opportunity. And then you build on to and say, leverage that BBC is very present here. would this be a story that's so cool that they would even pick it up? And then now we get what we're talking about.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think good you've mentioned, right, the rest of the production crew is here, so that we could brainstorm and how exactly that looks like. I think you're right on. For most of us, like we've always been reactionary in terms of only talking about what we're talking about when there's a conference and when we get a panel slot, when we get a speaking slot. And usually it's the session is so curated, you sort of just touch the top headlines and you don't go into the meats. I think for me, what I've seen is with this content, I think platform, the distribution is very interesting. It's the algorithm can take you places. And we've seen a couple of entrepreneurs getting funding and interest from investors just off of having a natural conversation. I think where also it could fit is maybe having an adjacent sort of alternative media for ESOs, right? You don't have to beg for mainstream kind of broadcast channels to showcase. And I think also a lot of the ESO work revolves around publishing reports and insights. If you bury your knowledge into 200-page documents, you only pitch the choir. Only the people who are really interested and really know your funders, your few clients here and there are the ones who read. But if you want to sort of like bring more new players, new investors, new donors, then you have to look at other creative ways of packaging such insights. So, and I think this could form as part of like infomercials and insights kind of storytelling for ESOs and funders as well.
And imagine this just as a test. So I think it was a lot of it. We need to test some of the ideas, But imagine just building on to this entrepreneur day. Imagine you did find a spot, and you put it forward in a way that for every 1,000 views, every 1,000 more trains we do, you put more into the pocket. And we then take whatever we make on that day and put that into a resource that then could be building and financing some of the community pieces, but where there is an alignment as well between what we could develop out of this and build. And in principle, you then could say, well, what if we were successful here? Would there be agencies who says, well, this is so interesting, we like what you did and it clearly worked. Why don't we build this into a sandbox or a something that you then build the infrastructure for, and then you can go and train others. You can give them the playbook so that in 3 months they can do the same in Nigeria, or they can do it in Uganda in 6 months' time, because there is a concept for it. Then you apply your local contextualization as you want. But there's so much more to play with if we started doing things like this. And they need to be tested. And one of the things that funders love is the word pilot. And I think for this is to build a pilot and then see where this takes us. But I think it could take us a good place. It's probably just that it needed a little bit of a collective effort where there's 5 or 6 of us. So let's do this. Let's spend a little bit of that time to get it off the ground.
A small word pan. When we say pilot, we often assume there's a plane, and rather, I know. Yeah. So I think very very good sort of reflectory or reflection point to end on. I think I'm sure there are others who will watch, and I think we have people who can also join in and who like to hear their feedback as well. So thanks, Ian, for spending time and reflecting on the past, the present, the future, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So looking forward to more of this, and connecting with other funders and other entrepreneurs who are excited about dealing with some of these challenges.
Fantastic. Big thanks.